Welcome back to the techno-communism conversation. Um, Somebody asked me why I always say that at the beginning of the show, and um, that is a pretty easy answer. Um, this species of ours is in very real danger of suffering a multi-billion person loss of life or total extinction. In fact, if we do not substantively change our economic system, removing a number of sectors by 2030, that will basically be a foregone conclusion. And we're already at this time of year, again, where this is more obvious than at other times of year. You have people dropping dead from the heat and other strange phenomena of this kind. And, well, what does that have to do with advanced computing and advanced technology and scientific socialism? Well, everything. What is a scientific socialist or a person who aspires to build a communist system? That is a person who is willing to stand up and fight for a humane and sustainable economic system, a thing that will not exist without such collective action. And so we surrender not merely to the cruelty um, of of the more fascistic and capitalistic institution, but we surrender to extinction itself. And so this part of being willing to fight for this is having the courage of your convictions to say who you are and recruit others to join in that collective and hopefully to organize in a better and better way, the way that would be necessary to build the thing that would be well organized enough to stop capitalism's climate apocalypse. And because of this short date, less than 5 years before we're going to see mega billion person loss of life. And don't be that person who says, in response to the prospect of a massive loss of life or near total extinction, well, I don't think everyone will go extinct. A certain percentage of people will adapt, because that is a very pretty explicitly white supremacist statement. That is saying that you and the 10 or 12% of people on this planet of European descent, the people who are the most responsible, particularly the ruling elites of that background, who are most responsible for this capitalism's climate apocalypse, will be the ones who will tend to survive, whereas the number of dead will skew dramatically, already does. Almost all the climate refugees and dead because of this set of circumstances today are in the global south. So those billions and billions of deaths further will tend to almost all be in the global south. So yeah, you are defending a circumstance where people who are innocent, who have no so-called virtually no um, carbon footprint and so forth, and no responsibility in upholding these ecocidal institutions in a way that an American a person will sometimes say, "Oh, I think there are good Americans." That's a little bit like saying that there are good cops, right? If there were good cops, they would stop bad cops from summarily executing African American people and committing other heinous acts. But instead, they help them sweep that under the rug. They uphold that system, which is fundamentally white supremacist. The police, this police state generally serves no function except to protect finance capital and weaken working people and or the necessary steps toward the building of a people's government. And so, because of this 5-year time frame, you might say I'm at a loss. I'm at a loss to know how we could organize that well in 5 years to abolish these three key sectors, let's say, that would need to be abolished for the species not to go extinct. Namely, the United States military-industrial complex, which is the world's worst polluter, and which serves no other function at all. It's not spending $1 trillion a year and super polluting to help Americans, right? Because 80% of Americans are basically living under a system where they're not paid enough to live. The Powell Memorandum kind of a set of mandates where they have artificially high rents and housing costs, artificially low wages, a whole host of other things to prevent them from becoming conscious human beings. The kinds of people who would possess the knowledge and the will and the ability to organize people's government that would be able to prevent this extinction event. Um, um, so this military-industrial complex only is really helping triple billing thieves, military contractors, and just finance capital and the wealthy elites generally. It serves no other function, and it does this elaborately on the world stage. And so, if that were itself the extent of its work, but it does this, that would be highly problematic. But it does this by things like that are described in Vincent Bevan's The Jakarta Method, killing 1 million people in Indonesia and so many other places by identifying groups of working people who are willing to stand up for people's government, a humane and sustainable economic system in their own country, and saying, well, that can't happen because then we won't be able to extract capital. And also, we have the value added, the perverse value added benefit of being able to organize so much of the economy that we care about for the billionaires and finance capitalists around this military-industrial complex itself, which is publicly funded, $1 trillion a year, coming from public coffers effectively, but doing the absolute worst things that it could possibly do in almost every case. So being the world's worst polluter, killing 50 million people in hot wars in living memory, you can tally that up pretty easily, right? Just the people that have been murdered in East Asia in living memory, on the Korean Peninsula, and in Indochina and Vietnam. It's a huge number of people. It's nearly a third of that number just alone. And then when you count actions in South America and the Middle East, the dissolution of the USSR, the illegal disbanding of the USSR, didn't seem to be a hot war on the part of the United States, but nevertheless it was a project that had been undertaken for 60 years on the part of the United States. From the moment the USSR came into existence, the United States was conniving with other North Atlantic powers to make sure that a scientific socialist state could not exist, to make sure that the people's government could not exist. So this so-called Russian Civil War was really it wasn't oh, we're just fighting the vestiges of the forces of the Tsar. It was the same thing that would happen in Indonesia. The imperial powers are funding those counter-revolutionary forces, so propping up at every step of the way. And so what happened in the Soviet Union? Well, in 1996, the Soviet Union had a vote to bring back, or the Russian Federation rather had a vote. Russia had a vote to bring back the Soviet Union. They wanted to bring back that because millions of people were dying and starving to death. They no longer had the basic necessaries of life ensured, as is the case in a scientific socialist country where you have the opposite of that Powell Memorandum mandate. You have a housing authority ensuring that everybody has a roof over their head, instead of millions and millions of people, as in the United States, living on the street or basically living on the street. They don't really count the people who are living out of their cars, who are highly unstably housed. They only count the people who are literally just standing there with a a jar in their hand, living in a tent. They can only really count those people. They don't count the millions of people who are unstably housed. But in a scientific socialist country, you have a housing authority, and what those people in early Soviet Union, they still had they had work programs. They were happy to work. They felt it was people generally felt that it was their duty to uphold the people's government and to further advance a cause of scientific socialism, not in some social imperialist project, as is often characterized, but as a duty to help to build a humane and sustainable world, as the duty of a human being engaged with other human beings generally. So they had a housing authority, they had a public health service, they had the healthy maintaining of supply chains. One of the most ridiculous things that's said about the Soviet Union of this kind is pretty easily debunked because there was 25 years, there was a doubling of life expectancy and a tremendous change in the industrial capacities of the country in 25 years, which is, let's say, a 4 or 5-fold increase over the such development that occurred in the course of the development of industrial capitalism. So scientific socialist a nation was able to do that 4 times faster than the industrial capitalists, who don't really exist anymore. We have finance capitalists today who would be basically worse than capitalists of the 1800s or 1900s in these respects. So people will talk about, there was an intentional famine. A mustache-twirling villain contrived an intentional famine in the USSR. It's not supported by the numbers. It also, there was a famine of a similar scale in the United States at that time, and no one says, oh, a mustache-twirling villain it did that on purpose. It makes no sense, right? It's a CIA talking point, and as much of what is said about the Soviet Union, and the point of that is so that you don't know that here we have industrial capitalism at 1x, here we have scientific socialism at 4x, and I will contend that we are looking at revolutionary cybernetic socialism in the 21st century. It's the thing that I speak and write about as much as I'm able, which we could say is 8x. In this era of this intelligence explosion mentioned in the title, in this era of this AI takeoff, the so-called AI singularity, let's say that we are now moving away from the relative slowdown of finance capital to a period of 8x, if we are able to organize around the necessaries for 21st century institutions that would uphold a humane and sustainable economic system. And that's not that hard to do. In 1971, 1972, 1973, Salvador Allende, using telex machines, a pretty simplistic kind of computing paradigm there, was able to arrange for a technological planned economy that could have had vast reverberating effects across South America and the rest of the world if allowed to be run. We could have already been having proto-techno-communism around the world by the late 20th century. But that project specifically was sabotaged in the way that the Soviet Union, they tried to sabotage and nearly sabotaged the Soviet Union, killing it in its crib. There's a famous quote from an American saying we have to kill this in its crib. Says it in a little more in the style of the language of the day, but basically saying that. And they were able to kill this crib. They were able to install fascist Pinochet and stop the CyberSyn project, the cybernetic socialist project undertaken by Salvador Allende and Stafford Beer, the two most notable contributors there, among many cybernetic socialists, some of whom are still living. Neither of those two people are living. Salvador Allende took his own life because he was a dove. He was a scientific socialist in effect, but not a revolutionary scientific socialist. He was a dove. He said, if I'm going to be attacked by fascist forces, so be it. I'm not going to take measures to protect myself that goes against my essential values. Unfortunately, a most typical position for people who otherwise might tend to support a people's government. You can't support a people's government unless you're able to maintain a people's government from the fascistic forces who will destroy it, as a matter of course, the moment they are able. So you have to be willing to take this a more revolutionary communistic approach to the organizing of the movement, the party, the institution at every turn. So of the Soviet Union, we're going through history of the Soviet Union. They tried to have a vote to bring it back. This North Atlantic fascist alliance led by the United States said you can't do that. We won't allow you to do that. You can't have the Soviet Union. You have to have our style of government, which now, of course, these people who contrived to have this style of government, now they have Russia as their great enemy. Of course, it's just a lot of foolishness. Imperialists are constantly bickering with one another. They do nothing functional in the world. It's just they do pretend as if they have some different interests among them, so let's fast forward to this age of AI, advanced computing development that we could call an AI explosion. You should try to resist this word, artificial intelligence. You can go back to ancient Rome and find the mechanical Turk gags, even then, or in centuries past, where somebody would just build something that's kind of robot-y looking and stand behind it and say, "Behold, I am the robotical man," or whatever they would say, and people were like, "Oh, that's so great." But it's meaningless, just no different than any other piece of theater. And that's mostly what the impulse that people are acting upon when they're talking about artificial intelligence is to kind of wax philosophical about the prospect of having a robot buddy. And so the conversation will turn to things like artificial personhood and kind of just bourgeois notions of political significance, rather than the fact that an intelligence explosion, an advanced computing set of advanced computing takeoffs is something that have a transformative effect on, say, doing that thing that we need to do, like building a humane and sustainable economic system within 5 years before we are locked into this runaway overheating from capitalism's climate apocalypse, causing the death of our species or the death of many billions. That's the path that we are on. And you should be terrified that. You should be willing to take a stand to that. And someone said to me, "Ben, you say a lot of stuff against the military-industrial complex. Aren't you afraid? Are they going to kill? Are they going to kill me a year and a half before they kill everybody else? Am I such a coward that I protect that year and a half at the expense of everyone else?" And that's what I see, is just a bunch of moral cowards. And it's an incredible contrast, because you have the moral cowardice, but almost no physical cowardice of this thing that's going to happen, where you're going to be cooked in an oven in, say, 2040 if we don't change this set of systems. They're not afraid of being cooked in an oven. They're afraid of defying the system that's setting them up to be cooked in an oven. So when I look at that contrast there, that when you strip away, a lot of the cultural foolishness and things from that, what I see is elitists, people who would not defend themselves, who would take the side of the billionaires and those ruling elites who are killing the planet. So this is kind of a conversation contrasting some ideas ranging from, I guess what we could say, an AI-driven world revolution approach to a state socialism in one country approach to a more particularly anarcho-syndicalist approach, and just trying to describe them in this context, assuming that we are seeing a real intelligence explosion, which is often dramatically overstated by people who have an interest in this sort of thing. Imagine a world where advanced computing has made these significant advancements beyond more and more with each passing day. So there is a tremendous amount of hyper connectivity, and traditional power structures have been challenged to a high degree, and that may not take the form of the active dismantling of the United States through revolutionary action or through my protest presidential campaign, where I've written an executive order that will disband the federal government, placing its correct duties, which is mishandles, in the hands of existing semi-autonomous, which would then be autonomous, Native American nations, just fundamentally it would be a project to end this $1 trillion a year abomination that is the military-industrial complex, the world's worst polluter, whose only job is to protect other super polluters. So that would be a way of doing a thing like that that doesn't involve, say, millions of people bivouacked outside of Washington, D.C., doing what they should be doing, waging war against this fascist power that's going to kill them otherwise. But it might be the case in the course of an AI takeoff that the thing is even more subtle still, that you have the emergence of new institutions, say transnational forces of the kind that I've described in the show quite a lot, that merely render the nation state and particularly the fascistic nation state less and less relevant with each, say, passing quarter. All of these are best case scenarios, right? Because this seems the most likely scenario is not techno-socialism, but techno-fascism. And I saw someone use a word that I don't like to use too much unless I maybe preface it first, and that is eco-fascism, because just like you say to maybe another communist who's driving around in an SUV and eating a cheeseburger, behaving as a capitalist consumer would, you say to them, you got to stop doing this. Granted, we have to organize to really end these sectors and bad imperial fascistic things that are killing the planet, but it's not effective to do that if you're participating in those things as a consumer, even though the impact is small relative to the needed impact for actually dismembering those institutions. And they say, "Sorry, Ben, there's no ethical consumption," commonplace phrase. There's no ethical consumption under capitalism, meaning such a thing would be unavoidable. But it's not unavoidable, right? You could make the choice to take mass transit and ride a bicycle. You can make a choice to eat the cheeseburger that tastes exactly the same as the cheeseburger you're eating, but it is made with plant-based products, which are entirely convincing across a broad range of products. So I have to assume that when a person pushes back against using those products, that the only real reason that they would do that is because they are invested in the ecocidal outcome, and they won't couch it in those terms, but that is what they're saying. And so they would say there's no ethical consumption under capitalism, which is not what that phrase was designed for. It was not designed it was not meant to be an evasion of your responsibilities. Similarly, when people refer to eco-fascism, um, almost in every single instance, they're not talking about the actual ecocidal fascists, say the people running the United States military-industrial complex, or the people in positions of authority or stakeholders in Shell Oil or entities in great number like this, other super polluters. They're not talking about those eco-fascists, right? They're talking about people who want to fight those those people. They would say, "Oh, they're being authoritarians. You can't have, you can't fight the actual fascists because somebody will accuse you of being an aspiring fascist. Because anybody doing anything is authoritarian, apparently." But a similar phrase that came up was basically that we have this choice between eco-socialism or eco-fascism, and the eco-fascists are winning. And I should have that phrase. It was something that said that I think I commented on a social media site. Um, but and I'm so I think of a quote from a man named Wendell Berry, and a serious writer in these areas. And Wendell Berry said that um, um, the earth is what we have in common. Um, a simple statement, but I think one that draws this into focus. We do not exist, and nor does any romantic notion of nature exist in the absence of human beings. Um, so and we do not exist without doing the work to maintain a viable habitat, which does not mean greenwashing. What most people are doing in this circumstance in the West, adding more. Oh, the Teslas are green. They're not. Their environmental impact is massive, and you're still adding another sector, even if they were. Um, you're still adding something rather than and then stopping the problem. It makes no sense. Elon Musk is a career greenwasher, um, a multi-trillion-dollar in his operations, a multi-trillion-dollar military-industrial complex mega asset, whose only job, if you look at across almost all of these businesses, is greenwashing. Right? You know what I'm saying? Convincing a large number of people who want to be convinced that they can continue to live in the way that they are, an unsustainable set of practices, convincing them that a sufficient amount of work is being done to create a sustainable system, and a belief that is in no way um, holds up under any scrutiny. Scrutiny. Um, Back to the prospect of our AI takeoff. I believe that we are on this razor's edge of oblivion as a species. We are also looking at a thing that could be strong enough to offset those set of problems. But of course, most of the people who point this out say effective accelerationists, as have been called in recent years, or tech accelerationists, or techno-utopians, and the tech-focused generally, are also neoliberals, also kind of greenwashers, people who are not interested in ending that military-industrial complex or ending the problems that are built into capitalism, even in the absence of trillion-dollar military budgets. This is long observed that capitalism will destroy the environment and enslave human beings, whether or not they're a trillion-dollar military-industrial complexes or not, but there is a level of consciousness and a level of development in this world such that I believe if these worst of evildoers, those people particular to the United States ruling elites who are maintaining this global hegemon and this super polluting, this effective regime of super pollution, if they were removed from the equation, as is the responsibility of people in North America, right? Most of you have kids, you have family members, but you are acting as if you care not a whit for them, right? It's just this purpose of raising a child for 18 years to condemn them to death. You could have just ended their life. A horrible thing to do. It would have been no different. It would have been no different than what you're doing. But because there's these layers of plausible deniability, because it's unfolding on a longer, tremendous amount of layers of plausible deniability involved in all of this, but also because it's unfolding on a longer time frame, they don't perceive it as an act of violence against their descendants. But it is a tremendous act of violence against their descendants. So it's the responsibility of people living in the imperial core, living in the United States, to take a stand against this regime of super pollution that is seated in the United States. It's not China's job, and more to the point, China can't build a revolution in another country. Only people in that country can build revolutionary forces to do that. So there's really, and looked at through this lens, there's really no more dastardly person in history than the North American, European North American. Sometimes people push back at referring to this set of systems as fascistic, and my only real response there is yes, the United States is worse than the European fascists who were admittedly fascists, right? Because their crimes, heinous as they were, and of the highest order, that should not be dismissed or denied. One thing that they didn't do was kill all the fucking people on planet Earth, right? As the North American European is doing. So that's a pretty bad situation. So, I mean, the only thing to say when somebody says, oh, the U.S. isn't famous, I don't see anybody with a funny mustache. I don't see anybody saying that we're ostensibly fascistic, although there are quite a lot. That is a characteristic of a lot of the ruling elites. The only response would be to say, you're right, it's uber fascism. It's worse. It's worse. So back to this contrasting of a Trotskyist AI takeoff, state socialist of the more Marxist-Leninist Maoist variety, and or the anarcho-syndicalist variety. I made mention of this outline in the last show, but I didn't get into it because I had another outline that I was working from, and I didn't want to deviate it from it too much more. That conversation went to more than an hour already at that point. The AI conundrum as it relates to scientific socialism is best understood by 20th standards. State socialism requires a centralized control. So you can envision that in the form of Chile's Cybersyn, the most advanced project of that kind to date. There was quite a bit of writing about something like this in the Soviet Union. Oh gosh. And I do believe that in this world where we had advanced computing, basic computing systems, and network technology that emerged by the 80s and were commonplace, I do believe that is essentially why the Soviet Union was ultimately dismantled in the way that it was at the time that it was, because something like the Ogash project would have begun to take form in any state socialist country under those circumstances, without kind of fascist sabotage, and just as cybersyn had to be eliminated more successfully than they had been able to eliminate the Soviet Union at its inception. So the Soviet Union, um, as a technological planned economy, had to be dismantled, so that we could have this wondrous thing of reverse Robin Hood tech, where we develop technology on the public dime, and then it's as soon as it becomes viable, it is then given over to finance capital. It's put exclusively in the hands of private wealth. So this is socialism for the rich, the most characteristic feature of finance capitalism of the late 20th and early 21st century, perhaps. It's something that must be stopped. There is no world where there is a sustainable system where finance capital continues to exist. Let's not kid ourselves, because almost every techno-optimist will more or less build their whole worldview around being evasive on this point. You have I was elected as a presidential candidate for a political party for the year 2020 before I rejected that endorsement. And it was because of this realization that these people were not capable of, say, doing the right thing under circumstances of supporting a lockdown, or demanding a public health service in the face of an ongoing pandemic, somehow still ongoing some years later. We haven't really done any of the things that we would have needed to do, which the things that I was trying to advocate for at the time. And these other people were not, because they're neoliberals. So you have people who are no different from people in the two-party system in terms of their the economic system that they're advocating for, but because they are kind of saying a lot of technobabble, and this effective worldview, which is little more than just trickle-down economics, but with a lot of science fiction tropes thrown in. That is what the techno-optimist is selling. Somehow that is going to be the thing that's going to fix the system, this effective same system. That's a scam, right? And whether we can demonstrably say that, well, this organization that I mentioned definitely had some people who had it on their resume openly that they were in intelligence agencies in the U.S., and had a lot of other people who were tending to fit that description. Almost everybody was some kind of right-wing think tank rat, which is basically a person working for a CIA cutout. So whether all of these organizations are CIA cutouts or only a few of them, it's not really that important, because whether they're being bad because they're just bad people, or because they're being specifically paid to be bad by an intelligence agency, they're still acting the part of a CIA asset. So when you see people who say, we're going to save the world, and the whole they're camping on valuable real estate, right? The whole technology conversation in the West then revolves around this alternative, which is not substantively different from what the ruling elites are already doing. They're already technocrats. They're already controlling advanced technology. They're already far-right neoliberals and imperialists. And their alternative, the system that they say must replace this, is fundamentally flawed in all the same ways. So yeah, there's no, even the folks that will tend to call themselves fully automated luxury communism, referencing a work of that name, advocates, there's a fundamental problem there relative to what scientific socialists of more revolutionary kind will discuss, which is basically, in as few words as possible, that you, as the beneficiary of fully automated luxury communism, must wait for the neoliberal establishment to fully automate your economy, and then they will kindly give to you this gift of full automation and luxury. It, of course, is laughable. It's completely ahistorical and frankly idiotic to believe that, because we've already seen under 20th century capitalism the near full automation of a variety of sectors, including farming. We at that same time saw the emergence of a professional managerial class facilitating the criminal accessories to the building of a billionaire class, effectively siphoning off all of that development of advanced technology already come to pass. So you don't have the effect where, say, the descendants of enslaved people and the sharecroppers of the early 20th century were somehow the ones who owned this automation and now are independently wealthy. That's a laughable thing, right, to say. That would be a laughable. The opposite is the case. These people don't even have the booby prize of, say, having a housing authority and a public health service to ensure that they who have been systemically excluded from that workforce and other workforces of a more late 20th century kind, they don't even they're forced to be those people among a great number, perhaps even the lion's share of those people who are unstably housed. Certainly, among those who are the worst of those who are living under that Powell Memorandum mandate of an abnormally high housing costs and abnormally artificially low wages. If 80% of the Americans are on that razor's edge, generally the 60% who work in the service industry are worse still, and that is the kind of job generally if the most marginalized groups, African Americans, Native people, Chicano people, if they are allowed really to work in this rigged system at all, it is in those jobs, the ones that pay the least, that don't even come close to paying a living wage. That is not, of course, an absolute universal. There are exceptions amongst individuals, but it is a tremendous effect. And so when we have this 5-year time frame, as I mentioned, the revolution replicating a success after success of state socialism developed in one country becomes a little harder to perhaps envision than the consequence of the kind that I alluded to of this hyper-connected world establishing a force to be reckoned with that could dispatch the fascist powers. And so what is then the internationalist revolution in a hyper-connected world? Organizing a large-scale coordinated revolution across an AI agentic, advanced computing, AI takeoff experiencing hyper-connected world is in some respects a more hypothetical kind of project than the thing that has been done, building of state socialism in a variety of countries. But I think in a certain light, the more credible thing in that time frame, and if you are willing to accept a thing that I think is fairly certain, that an AI takeoff of some speed faster than before is going on, not necessarily the kind of singularitarian logic, which is itself, I think, one among those neoliberal stratagems that I'm aligned. But something along these lines, AI could therefore basically make use of unique mass communication and put an end to the forces of reaction. So I've talked about this. You say, Ben, this is still a little unclear. I've talked about this in terms for 2024 of modifying, which I have a GitHub that has the makings of this that I'm hoping to continue to work on. And I've shared. You can look at that. I'll link it in this in these posts, and also you can email me. I'll put the email in the posts as well. You can email me at benzion2020@gmail.com if you would like to work on this. But basically, this the availability of open sourced LLM models, open source LLM models that are increasingly AI agentic, that are able to not merely produce voluminous writing assistance, but able to reflect more on goals, and so become something more like a proxy comrade. But that is of little significance to the individual, right? It's kind of could be kind of fun for me to have 20 digital assistants pretty well able to manage my life. It might change my material circumstance slightly. I'm still on a dying planet under an unsustainable system. But if we can imagine that as a great force multiplier among the collective, and we can, because this open source LLM AI agent available basically in the course of 2024, so this should become a viable project in 2025. If you have, let's say, 1,000 people who all download this specially tailored LLM that is specially tailored to mainly work with other LLMs hosted on the other 1,000 users' computers, and this becomes a semi-autonomous work group wherein the human beings are functioning to kind of keep that thing from hallucinating, keep that thing from going off the rails, keep that thing from being sabotaged itself. And they're able to do this with almost no workload. So say, for the most part, the average user would be just answering a few emails, possibly yes or no emails, throughout the course of a day or week, to help to steer the thing. And this is then a tremendous workforce multiplier, and a tremendous revolutionary force, but operating on basically a click-through process for any individual user, where the individual user, the comrade in that equation, is effectively doing higher-end work possibly than anyone on Earth, but it could be doing this more or less in their sleep. Merely hosting the thing and providing minimal work product on their own part. And this, I think, in the thousands of people making use of such a system, you have the potential to possibly transform a cityscape, or present a project of worth to the region in one form or another. Like I mentioned, designing and building a desal plant in San Diego, a coastal city that's going to have increasing water crises and would need ultimately at some point a desalination plant. That could be something that could be crowdsourced by this unique model. When you have hundreds of thousands of people connected with, again, this have to be modified continuously to make the best use of the state of the art of advanced computing, and also to be better better arranged to work with the larger and larger groups. But when you have hundred thousands of people, I think that then you're getting to the point, or certainly millions, you're getting to the point where we might be in a position to reverse the effects of capitalism's climate apocalypse and save this species from extinction or near extinction. And when you have many millions, hundreds of millions or billions, I think that then you are in a situation where you have supplanted the fascistic institution at every turn, and so you might still have Mike Johnson, the Speaker of the House, a fascist, the Speaker of the House of the United States, saying and doing fascistic things, but it doesn't matter. He's no real power anymore. And hopefully, in my view, people like this meet a swifter fate still, because again, something quite dramatic must occur in the next 5 years along these lines: revolution or extinction. So hopefully that this description gives us enough context to what this transformation of advanced computing might be, not in the year 2525, not in a far distant future, as so many of these tech obsessives will tend to talk about these things as the very real sense in which these people are far future right-wing thought experimenters rather than serious thinkers. We have to contextualize this in human need, sustainability, and human rights, which largely means economic enfranchisement of the masses, and we have to contextualize it in the here and now, and not be utopians of some kind or other. Not an easy thing to do. Not any of that. Not least of which is conceptualizing and organizing such things. So this described what I described moments ago as I've referred to this often as the agentariat or AI agentic class. This semi-autonomous, and it could most largely be autonomous, but there's a very real problem of, let's say, the hallucinating. If you allow the AI agentic mass without the users overseeing it kind of do whatever it wants, it will almost instantly be doing dumb things that it thinks are smart but are not helpful. So you really have to kind of keep an eye on it. Or it just stops doing things. That would be, it would just grind to a halt in one way or another. So this is, I am a state socialist, a supporter of building existing state socialism into full communism, and not removing state socialism until such time as full communism is stably achieved. So this project that I've just described is more of an anarcho-syndicalist kind, and but I don't consider that to be problematic, because we have to build something that's versatile enough to operate outside of this kind of Jakarta method model where political organizers are just crushed by fascists at every turn. We have to make something a little more amorphous. We have to make something that could grow to the scale and scope that I described in the time frame that I described. So this anarcho-syndicalist approach becomes strategic necessary rather than a disavowal of state socialism. And those who disavow state socialism, by and large, are misguided individuals. They're attributing to a universal of human nature, a thing that's very specific to finance capitalists and the bourgeois. So they will say, well, the problem is all government. All government is the problem. And there's fundamental flaws to governance structures across the boards. But by taking this approach, as nearly every Westerner does, nearly every Westerner thinks of themselves as some kind of person on the right side of history, anti-establishment person, and yet they will almost all take this approach, which is fundamentally the poison thought of anarchist thought relative to scientific socialist thought, that where they're in effect exonerating the bourgeoisie because they're attributing it to a more general set of problems rather than a problem specific to the bourgeoisie. Um, so this there's potentials for hybridization in systems in the near term that I think are not being acknowledged. For the most part, when they're acknowledged by technologists or tech pundits, these other techno-utopians and so forth. I was talking about a guy who I met. I guess I met him in video calls before. A person who's been some kind of organizer along these lines for a while, who would have been described as an AI singularitarian a few years ago. And now that this thing is looking like a real thing and not a right-wing far future thought experiment, he's become more of this AI doomer. This person says we should put the brakes on this. And I would argue that all of these people are serving at the behest of intelligence agencies of the West, whether they want to admit it or not, whether they, the extent of their collusion would be, of course, a matter for further research. But the simple fact is the people who are scaremongering about an advanced computing takeoff are not scared of the fate of humankind. They are concerned for the fate of finance capital. This thing is a potential disruptor to the economic system, and they are taking on rhetoric to protect that and making it sound like something else. I have a few more notes that I wanted to get to in this, but I think I'm going to save them for another day. But we must acknowledge that in the 21st century, this AI takeoff is occurring. Advanced computing is the most powerful revolutionary tool that has ever existed. Unfortunately, it's being used for effective techno-fascist revolution by what's occurring today, or not being used in appropriate ways at all, leading us all to be resigned to this fate of extinction. But if we are to use it properly, we must first and foremost acknowledge that the 21st century is different from centuries past. So the kind of analysis that is solely based on Sovietology or the operations of industrial capital and other things along these lines is not sufficiently updated analysis. The strategies of the kind that I described, focusing on dramatically different AI-human collaboration and the building of coalitions within such undertakings, the building of new institutions and new sectors that would be driving this change will be the key to success there. But we have to be able to, first and foremost, be able to reject the far-right operations of financial capital and empire, and be outspoken in support for this revolutionary scientific socialist necessity, and embrace new possibilities there. And I believe that by doing so, 21st century revolutionaries can work within that 5-year time frame for a humane and sustainable future in the wake of this advanced computing takeoff. And I mentioned that the CyberSyn project could have easily, in the absence of a military-industrial complex or Western shenanigans generally, could have led to a widespread adoption of a technological planned economy, so much so that I believe that an AI takeoff could have easily occurred by the year 2000, this year, when people of the last century tended to imagine such things of that order of magnitude would have occurred. Of course, that's not what happened. As I mentioned, that's largely owing to the emergence of this professional managerial class and billionaire class, and the scam of theft of unprecedented scale that occurred because of that. But nevertheless, what happens when this AI takeoff occurs, and you have human beings um, um, having their fundamental economic rights protected in every continent to a man, ending this global regime, not just the global regime of superpollution, but ending the global regime of European supremacy and colorism, where you have people in the global south systemically excluded from this on this white supremacist basis. That's more or less the project of the European from the earliest moments that capitalistic institutions emerged. The triangle trade began to emerge, shortly around the time of 1492 when Columbus sailed the ocean blue, and he landed on some islands which had Taino occupants and forced them to work in plantations and basically worked the residents of first one of those islands all to death. Having some, like the people in Palestine, having not enough calories a day to live and work at that pace, and forcing them to work an insane amount of hours. That's what slavery is, and it's what wage slavery is to this day, and existing slavery to this day. So he worked them all to death, and then basically goes to the Pope, Catholic Church, and says, "We did a really good thing here. We worked a whole society to death. We committed a genocide, a full genocide. There's no Taino people left. There's some scattered Taino ancestry that can be tracked. It's not really Taino people in that way. There's people who are kind of re-emerging as identifying as Taino and embracing some cultural aspects there, but they're artifacts. They don't know how Taino people really lived very much. And so that project was replicated hundreds and hundreds of times. Murders on the scale of the Holocaust, which we call the Holocaust. It is not the Holocaust, because murders on that scale have occurred hundreds and hundreds of times. And that is a European project. That is a development of capitalism operating parallel and in conjunction with those projects of enslavement of Native and African people, and the building of a wage slave system to continue to punish their descendants and working people of other backgrounds to this day. But when we end that scourge of scarcity and instability and cruelty, then we can have this thing that, again, these techno-optimists will talk about, but with virtually no insight, with that ahistorical view, something like a public health service that treats aging as a reversible condition effectively. We are at the point in the development of biomedical advancement where that is a realistic prospect, but that means very little to you, assuming you're not worth $100 million. That means very little to you that we've made such advancements if we do not have not merely a public health service, which the United States lacks, as a for-profit healthcare system that kills 100,000 people a year, but a public health service to a higher standard than any that's existed, that's able to provide real-time services treating aging as a reversible condition. So I believe that in our time, we could well have universal super longevity, everyone living as long as they want. Not everyone seems to want to live as long as they could, but that's up to them. I don't think that I think that ultimately they would opt in for that, but that's a personal choice. But we cannot do any of these things as long as these 30,000 people, it's 30,000 people, the ruling elites of the North Atlantic powers, particularly the United States, are continuing to force the rest of the world into this regime of superpollution that I referred to many times. And so this dramatic action must be taken, not merely of a radical kind, but of a revolutionary cybernetic socialist kind. And when that does occur, we will see a utopian outcome. So I'd like to say the words that I like to say sometimes. The artificial intelligence singularity is near, and wonders to behold beyond imagining. And on that fateful day you will rise, and all humankind will become as one. For techno-communism will win. And I want to remind you that you are a person of history, and you will succeed. For generations other in the past have merely dreamed in uniting humanity to common purpose and seeing this world revolution. Thank you.